original audience would have thought about whatever it is that you're reading in the Bible, okay? So you're looking at the historical context. Also, you're looking at the literary context. So whatever passage you may be looking at, you got to look at the broader context. Where does it fit within the literary structure of where it is you're reading? Okay? So that's the first and very important question. If you don't do that, whatever other things do, whatever other conclusions you come to, you most likely will get it a little bit wrong. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, what does it say? What does it say to me today? Yeah? Those are the two basic questions that you should do as you are reading and interpreting the Bible. In other words, how do you read the Bible? That's the basic question. So let's just explore that a minute. How do you read the Bible? When you pick up your Bible to read it, how do you read it? Some people read it like it's just a book of ancient history. Critical theologians do that. They say the Bible isn't something inspired. It's just something from a long period ago that they're just describing what the mindset of people was a couple of thousand years ago. Most of us don't do that. We believe at least that the Bible is inspired. So that's not the way we approach the Bible generally. Some will approach it from a literary point of view. Literary studies. I don't know if any of you are doing any literary studies. Generally, in literary studies, very simplistically, the reader is in the focus. So you don't think about background or anything like that. It's, what do I get out of this? What does it mean for me? How am I reading this poem? Doesn't matter what Shakespeare meant about it. It's, how do I experience this? That's the literary studies approach. Maybe sometimes the way in which we approach the Bible, we're doing that. Because we're not thinking about context, we're not thinking about anything else, we're just, what's this saying to me? Yeah, and we tend to do that. And literary studies kind of encourages that. Many of us will have learned to read the Bible doctrinally. I don't know if you grew up in the church or if you became a member later on, but we teach you doctrines. We have 28 at the moment. So if you're going to have baptismal studies, you will be taught the 28 fundamentals of the Adventist church. So, for example, if I was to ask you, what is the book of Malachi about? Tithing, exactly. Because that's the book where you find the text about tithing. Because we've learned to read the Bible doctrinally. So we know where to go to find this doctrine, or where to go to find that doctrine. But we don't know anything else about the book of Malachi, generally. There's a whole lot more than tithing in the book of, but no, because we've been taught to read it doctrinally. That's how we approach the Bible. Another way, devotionally. That is then that we are trying to find out what is it that God might be trying to say to me. And generally, when we're reading the Bible devotionally, what we're doing is, well, we tend to stay in the New Testament because it's easier to get something positive from the New Testament, we tend to feel, right? I mean, the Old Testament is so full of some gruesome details, we don't really want to go there. So if you're going to read the Bible devotionally, we tend to stay in the New Testament side of it. And these are the ways in which we generally read the Bible. Whenever we pick it up, if we're doing our Sabbath school lesson, we are doing generally doctrinal ways of looking at it. Or you may have devotional books that you may read that have a text at the top of it and then some commentary on it. That's the way we tend to read the Bible. But I would like to suggest that for Adventists, we need to start reading the Bible as a story. This is our unique contribution to the Christian world. Adventists should be reading the Bible as a story. So let me give you a little bit of work. Just the people close by you, okay? The Bible starts with creation and it ends with recreation. What comes in the middle? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Quickly, talk to the people close to you. What would you put in between there? Write it down. And
for our online viewers, just trying
30
to test here
seconds
to
left.
see how the sound is. Can you guys hear us better now?
Okay, time's up. Let's hear. So, in the storyline of the Bible, we start with creation. What's the next major event? The fall. Very good. So sin and the fall comes in next. All right, what's the next major event in the Bible? Cain and Abel. Okay. Anybody else? Repopulation. Okay. Anything else? The covenant through Abraham. All right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think the flood is the next major thing. Yes. Something huge happens. I mean, everything changes after that, right? So the flood. So what would be the next major event then after the flood? Babylon? The Tower of Babel? Okay.
Creation of the promised people, Israel.
The creation of Israel. All right, all right. Anything else? The covenant, Abraham. Most people are saying Abraham and the covenant. Okay. I put the patriarchs down because Abraham is the first one. Isaac and Jacob, yes. They're the foundation, if you like, of somebody talked about the starting up of Israel. The patriarchs, something special happens there with the patriarchs, especially covenant with Abraham and how God's going to be leading from that time onwards. Yeah? After the patriarchs, what's the next major block? Egypt?
Exodus.
The Exodus, yeah? All right, yeah? That's what I think as well. I mean, you know, you could have it any way you like. It's just how I am. After the Exodus, what's the next major thing that happens?
Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments? Judges? Settling in the new land.
Wilderness.
Yeah, I think the conquest. Joshua, the book of Joshua, really significant. You've had Moses, but that conquest bit there, and this part here, we have a hard time with. There's a lot of killing going on here.
A lot of genocides.
Yeah. And we've got to deal with that if we really are going to have anything to say to the world. So, but yeah, it's a major part in the Bible. After the conquest, what's next? The kings? Huh? Babylon. Okay. Right. You've got the judges. The period of the judges is something quite significant because this is the way in which Israel was meant to be led. And as you know in the book, it doesn't work. It just goes from bad to worse. And the worst story in the Bible is in the book of Judges, right? The Levite and his concubine. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. So after the judges, yes, you said it's the monarchy, the kings, and the prophets. The bulk of the Old Testament is that next bit. Lasts for several hundred years. What's after that? After the kings, after the monarchy? Babylon, as somebody said, yes. The exile is, I mean, in the Israelite psyche, this was such a blow. When you first were a nation and you had all your kings and everything, and the prophets keep saying, you know, God's going to put you in exile if you don't. And it actually happened. So it should really say the exile and return, because then you have the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that talk about when they return. Some of them return back to the promised land. After this then, what happens? The Messiah. Yeah, Jesus comes. Yeah? After Jesus, the church. After the church, the second coming. Yeah. And then we have some other things that we put in there, but I'm not putting it in there now, okay? That for me is the basic storyline of the Bible. So basically, when you're reading the Bible, the first question you want to be asking is, where in the storyline are we? Yeah? If you're going to do that historical thing, where are we? If I'm taking a text, where are we in the storyline? And then you've got to understand what's the major things happening right there. Yeah? So when you do this then, and this is why I say in Genesis 1 to 3, something interesting happens. God creates Genesis 1 and 2. Chapter 3, so if you're thinking of a story, the hero of the story is introduced in the first sentence. In the beginning, God. He's the hero. Genesis 1 and 2. And then in chapter 3, you have the antagonist. The villain of the story is introduced. A talking serpent. And what's interesting is, when you hear about that talking serpent in Genesis 3, you read through the rest of the Bible, and you don't see him. He disappears completely. And it's not until you get onto the last book of the Bible, right in the center of the book, the pinnacle of the book of Revelation, chapters 12 to 14, the talking serpent reappears. In other words, Adventists are supposed to know, what if we take, of course, what you're told in Revelation 12 to 14 is this talking serpent started a war. Started a war in heaven. So if you take that information with you and you reread the Bible, So you always have that war in mind, in the back of your mind. It transforms the way you see the whole of the Bible. Everything becomes different. And I will guarantee you that, because that's what I've discovered. And that's what Adventists are supposed to bring to the world. We are rereaders of the Bible, not just a plain reader, not just reading what's there and just reading it devotionally, which is fine. We are rereaders. Help people to see the storyline and what's going on, because there's this war playing out in the background all the time. So, we're rereaders. All right. That means then those two basic questions that I was talking about. What did it mean? Yes, we ask that. We do ask, what does it say to us? But there's a second question which is really significant. What does it say about God? Because this war is all about an enemy saying, you cannot trust God. And so throughout the whole of the Bible, God's trying to show that he is trustworthy. And he's trying to answer the accusations of that enemy. Take that with you as you read the Bible, and suddenly you start to see things that you've never seen before. So let's just take this with us then. Second part of this, negative pictures of disability. Is the Bible negative towards disability? Many disability theologians say, yes, it is. Here's why. And here's some of the texts. Leviticus 21, Luke 5, John 5, and John 9. We're going to go into these in just a little bit more. So Leviticus 21. You have a description here where God is saying the people that cannot be priests or working in the temple. Notice what it says. None of your descendants who has a defect may come near to offer the food of his God. My son, in a wheelchair, couldn't. No man who has any defect may come near. No man who is blind or lame or disfigured. You see that? That's why people say, well, the Bible's negative towards disability. Even God's saying you can't be priests. Luke 5. Because often, another reason why theologians will say that the Bible is negative is because it kind of associates disability with sin. The story in Luke 5 where you've got that paralyzed man that comes through the roof. Remember that one? His friends bring him along and they couldn't get in, so they lower him through the roof. Do you remember what Jesus says to him? When he saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." So theologians say, see? Jesus is associating disability with sin. Negative. Not the only time he does it. John chapter 5. Remember that man who'd been there for 38 years by this pool, and whenever it would move, people would try to jump in, and he could never do it. Later, after Jesus had healed him, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you're well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." Again, equating disability with sinning. And you know the story in John 5, the man who was born blind. And his disciples are asking him, so who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? So, here's some work for you to do. I'm going to divide you, oh boy, this is not, I wanted to divide you into 4. Okay. All right, I will do that. So, let's say the priestly prohibitions, the first half of the room here, okay? Read that and then ask those 3 questions. See how you would answer those 3 questions based on that. You can do it in your smaller groups, but you're working on that text, okay? At the back there, so from this young man here in the black, backwards, and you can be in smaller groups. You work with Luke 5, the paralyzed man through the roof, and you're asking these 3 questions. The front group here, you work on John 5, the man at the pool of Bethesda, again, asking the 3 questions. And at the back, you're working on John 9, the man who was born blind. Okay, just answer the 3 questions. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer those 3 questions, and then we'll feed back together. Okay? Go ahead. You can be in smaller groups, but just be answering the questions about the first story, yeah? Hey, Richard, how are you?
Nice to see you.
You all right?
I'm just listening what my brother's preaching.
Give the following instructions to Aaron and all future generations. None of your descendants will have anything qualified to office. No one who has a defect qualifies for signs, names, figures, or has a broken arm, or is hunchbacked, or has a defective eye, or skin sores, or scabs, or damaged intestine. No descendants of Aaron will have any defects. They will altar to present special gifts
Seconds left. Okay, 5 minutes is up. I'll give you 1 more minute then. Some people need it.
Temporary application. What I'm seeking to do is kind of put boundaries on people, but that's what I don't want to do. I'm sure. So yeah, this is telling me I have to put boundaries because some things are too holy for, I guess, people that are not perfect to do.
Okay, I think we need to come back together again.
Well, so maybe after like Jesus came, then it became different. Yeah.
Maybe you'll be able to continue your discussions at lunchtime, if it stimulated a lot of thoughts. All right, let's have a look at these stories and share a little bit. So the first half of the room here, you were looking at the priestly prohibitions. So what did it mean in its historical context? Any thoughts?
Well, we here came to the conclusion that those people that have disabilities, they're not sinful because of those disabilities. Those disabilities represent the sin in itself, in a spiritual world. Not that you're sinful because you're blind, but that blindness represents our spiritual blindness. And
Okay.
if the priests should have represent Jesus and his perfection, then it doesn't work that you represent with that. Not because you are cast out from God, but it was just about the picture.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Good struggling with that. Anybody else from this group? Yeah? Will you shout?
We thought more about what is said about God directly, and we noticed that many of the disabilities that were described were oddly specific. So it said if you had problems with your foot or your hand or your eye, then you shouldn't do the work on the whole sacrifice thing or whatever. I'm not that good at English anyway. And we came to the conclusion that it is because people with disabilities have more problems to perform those hard and long ceremonies that were required back then. And I mean, God chose one big group of people, the Levites, just to do that one job. So I imagine that for someone who couldn't walk or had problems with their hand, it would have been very, very hard and physically exhausting to do those jobs. So I think that God just wanted to kind of give them rest or something.
He was
like
sparing them from that kind of. Okay, all right. So if we take the last question then, because we've done the first one, What would that mean for us today?
Yeah, this is what I was saying. In the Adventist church, you can imagine there's so many eager, enthusiastic people in our midst, in our congregations, who are just as talented as someone who may not have a disability. So that falls that I put it to everyone, you know, how do we apply it to today's time?
Yeah.
And for me, I think taking in point what our sister said there and you said there, it's very important that, again, yes, we consider the practicality of it, but where we can allow space for them to operate, we should do. It's
Okay.
just me. Just not group talk, it's just me.
All right. All right. Yes?
I think, just to add a little bit on I think I'll tie all the three together. I think historically, this is just what I think, there tended to be like really negative sentiments towards people with disabilities.
Uh-huh.
So maybe in this way God was, or what it says about God is that he sort of meets people where they're at. In contemporary times, I honestly think what he said is true. There are many people with disabilities that are just as capable as an able-bodied person of performing. I think the boundaries or the barriers tend to be put there because of able-bodied people who do not
Right.
accommodate
Yes.
people with disabilities.
Yes. Yes. And that's generally what tends to happen. Okay. I'm trying to get through. Okay, go ahead. And
Another thing that we also learned is our God is a God of love. He loves us, and we should also be content with some of the gifts that he has given us, some spiritual gifts, some talents, and also be thankful for whatever he has given to us. If someone is able to perform some duties that we are not able also to do, we should pray for them and be happy for them. There's also some other things that we're able to perform. We should do it also wholeheartedly. That's what
okay.
I also learned.
All right. Good. Thank you. Last comment here then, and then I'm going to go to the next group.
I think that everything about the Leviticus passage, verse 23, the very last sentence summarizes it very well. For I, the Lord, do sanctify them. Everyone, the Lord sanctifies everyone. The Levites, the crippled, the ill, everyone is sanctified.
And it's God that does it. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for wrestling with that. The next group then, the paralyzed man through the roof. What was the historical context? Yeah?
Pharisees believed that if a man is disabled, he must be, he has to have some sin.
Right. And it wasn't just the Pharisees either. Historically, that's what everybody believed, because you'll see it in John 9 as well. So that's the context, yes. You got a disability, you have sinned. Or maybe your parents did, or somebody. So that's the mindset that this is functioning in. Okay. What's the story say about God? Second question. Yeah?
God, he can do everything for us when we are like believe him, you know, so he can like heal us and everything.
So God can heal if we believe in him. Yeah? Okay?
Maybe not just healing, it's the changing whole life. It's a turning point.
Okay, so he can change our lives completely. Okay, good. Next, Pia.
I believe that God didn't want just to show that his sin are forgiven or now he's fully healthy, but I think God wanted to show that. Sorry, I lost my thoughts. Give me a second. Θέλω να πω ότι I'm sorry, just
okay, come back to us. Come back to us. Okay.
Now, yeah.
One more hand at the back there, Mike.
I think with what he said, with many of your sins are forgiven, he nullified what the precept was, that he was a sinner, therefore he was paralyzed.
So he was acknowledging the fact that he was a sinner.
No, he said, Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Yeah?
Okay, sometimes Jesus had to say things for the people to understand. Because even though physically he healed him, many people continue to believe that he's a sinner, but now it's just a sinner that can walk. So maybe they could still have him isolated from the community. So Jesus had to declare that he's not a sinner because in people's eyes was a sinner.
Right.
So sometimes Jesus had to say things for the people to understand because it was so, disability and sin so strongly connected in their minds.
Yes.
So he couldn't just say, oh, disability is not a sin. Maybe it wasn't the right time.
Okay, okay. Let's take the last question then. What does it mean? I mean, you know, what's it say to us today? What's the application? Yes.
Okay. Maybe it's better for this question, my answer. I just want to say that why do I need to be healthy if I am losing my eternity? So, I mean, I think God wanted to show us from this context that all that truly matters is to be forgiven, that our sins are forgiven, instead of being healthy and walking and stuff. I'm saying it's very good to be healthy, of course.
Sure.
And please keep your health healthy. But I think I'd prefer not being healthy, but have an eternal life.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. All right, let's go to the third story. The man at the pool of Bethesda. Is that this group? Historical context, I guess, is the same thing. It's that whole thing of sin and disability, all right? But what's it say about God? Yeah?
I think we were talking a lot about God's compassionate nature. The man was by the pool, had no one to help him into the water, and, Jesus comes along and helps him, just like that, and this is a guy who's an outcast. He has no one to help him, and that might be because they, thought there was a huge correlation between sin and the disability, so maybe lots of people blamed him and thought, well, he doesn't need help then, it's his fault. Whereas Jesus, he looks further, is what we said, Jesus has so much compassion for us. Jesus asked if he wanted to be healed, and he said yes, and that's all he's asking us all the time. And, that's what we, saw, that Jesus really looks deeper and at the heart.
Yes.
At things we can't see.
Very good. The grace of God. Yes?
And as well that even if it seems to be impossible for us to, for the man, he was laying there for 38 years. It seemed to be impossible for him to get into the water to get healed, what he believed,
Yes.
what he needs to do. But even if we think it's impossible for God or for Jesus, it's not impossible.
Okay. And so for us today, that's kind of a little bit what you were saying there. Seem impossible, but nothing's impossible for God. Anything else?
Also, God uses a holistic approach. So he's been preoccupied with the physical needs of the person, but also the spiritual side of it. So
okay.
It's he looks at both the physical side and the spiritual
And the
side.
spiritual. Okay, thank you very much. And the last group, the man born blind. I think the historical context is exactly the same. I mean, they would even go so far back as to say maybe it was his parents, because he's born with this thing. His parents had done something wrong. So what's it say about God?
I mean, there was an interesting sentence at the last where Jesus approached the Pharisees and told them that if you would have been blind, you wouldn't have sinned. But you say that you see, so your sins are your own. So that's an interesting sentence where he closed this story with.
Okay. And what you said, what does it say about God?
We talked about it just a couple of minutes before the end, and it was like it is not on, it's not connected to sin directly, the disability.
Uh-huh.
So because it doesn't fit with the disability.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean anything with it.
Yes. And there's another one there.
Yeah, that sometimes instead of just looking for pity with the pain we suffer, looking for a plan that God has on us, that it was what it says in the text, that is not that their parents sin, but that God has a tool in which He can show His power, and it's just with us we can see this in our daily lives. Just look for a way to try to find a path in which we can show what God does in everybody's life.
Okay, and that's the contemporary application. There was another hand just behind you? Yeah.
Yes. I just wanted to make a comment on the Pharisees, because they were always trying to accuse Jesus of something. So they were like, how can this guy heal people on the Sabbath or do whatever? He's just a sinner. But the thing is, Jesus sometimes prioritizes serving rather than just following the rules. Like, following the law of God is really good, but sometimes we have to think about our neighbors as well. And that's a really interesting point that
Yes.
Jesus pointed out here.
So if you're thinking about rules or people, Jesus seemed to lift up people more than at least the man-made rules that were there. Yeah. Final comment?
So I think the story is actually a great example for why God is not disability negative, but the society around this certain context, like even the disciples were kind of, because it was like the historic context is. But in essence, what he says right after is, no, they haven't sinned, and he's still disabled, so there is no connection.
Yes.
It's pretty straightforward, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me quickly, in the last 10 minutes, run through a few thoughts, just so you have these with you. Here's a theologian who talks about, he says, there's a fear in every human being that needs to be dealt with if it's not to become a burden to us. Buried deep within us is the idea that when we are going through difficult times, we have in fact displeased God. And if you want to test that theory, when stuff goes wrong in your life, how quickly does the question come, did I do something to anger God? We all do it. This is the problem. We think we've done something wrong to God, so now He's going to punish us with something or other. We generally have a default negative picture of God. Anyway, so when it comes to sin, something I want you to remember. Sin is about relationship damage. It's not stuff you do. Sin is distrust. That's what it is. It's distrusting God. Once you because that's what Satan tempted Eve to do. He didn't say, eat the fruit. He said, did God really say? I mean, what kind of person is God? And she started to doubt God. Then other stuff happened. So sin is distrust, which leads to a couple of things. First of all, fear. God had been coming every day, meeting with Adam and Eve, no problem. After the encounter with the talking serpent, they were afraid of him. He managed to paint this picture of God that made them scared of God. Fear. And fear leads to selfishness. When we are afraid, we think of ourselves first. If the room starts to burn, you're not thinking about, please go ahead of me. Everybody's going to run for the door. This is what happens. Fear leads to self. We think of self first. And you see that happening in the Garden of Eden. Yeah.
I have a question. So does that mean that only fear is leading to selfishness? Or are we selfish by our own existence as departure from God?
Right. I think the fear part is what starts that trajectory.
Really?
Yeah.
You think that we are not selfish by ourselves? I mean, even if there isn't a fire, we are still selfish, you know?
Yes,
To
yes.
think only about
Indeed,
ourselves.
indeed, and yeah, exactly. But I think that the root problem is our fear of or distrust of God.
Yes, but I have another question then. Is really the fear or the distrust that is the sin, or is the sin that we believe that we could be more than we are, that we could be like God?
Yeah.
And then the distrust came. And all
But the
of
thing
that.
is, why start to think that if you don't first of all distrust that God has said, I've made you in my image, etc. This is what Satan's been doing. His way of operating is to sow distrust. Because if you distrust, then you have to start thinking, okay, I've got to look after my own self. I've got to take matters into my own hands. You mean he's hiding stuff from me and not wanting me to be the best I can be? He's trying to make me less than I should be. I should be like God. It all starts with the distrust. That's how I see it.
Well, I have another question.
Okay.
It will be fast. I understand that distrust is like the first thing.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that the actual root is that, as the Lucifer also did, he first wanted to be more than he was. And then it was like, why doesn't God let me be more than I am? You see? And then he wanted to become.
But it's not Adam.
What?
Adam made the choice of eat the apple not because of it.
Okay, yeah. Can we carry on after? I think you've got to, yes. Because I've only got 5 minutes to finish up, but it's a really interesting discussion. I do think that what he started to do, because when he came, the first thing he says, did God really say that he's sowing seeds of distrust? That's the first thing, always. Because from that, if you've always been trusting in God, and that's broken, it leads to everything else. It leads to the selfishness, self-preservation. It leads to fear and all the rest of it. So that's how I see it happening. But in the Bible commentary, it even says that the basis of sin is relational. It's to do with how we're relating to God. That's the foundation for sin. And that's important because what God's trying to do, God's solution for sin, is to move us from distrusting him to trusting him. That's why Jesus is saying, do you believe? In the Bible, the word for believe, faith, and trust is the same word. They're not different things. We have 3 different words in English. I don't know what you have in your languages, but it's just the same word. It's trust. So God's trying to move us from distrust back to trust, from fear to confidence in him, from selfishness back to love, thinking of others. So Jesus' healing ministry, notice when he read the scroll in his hometown, it was to show the Lord's favor, to proclaim the Lord's favor. All the healing he did was to restore trust in God, because people thought we are under God's curse. God is looking with disfavor on us. That's why we are overrun by the Romans. That was people's idea with regards to God. Jesus' healing ministry was to show, listen, God looks at you with favor. And that's what you were bringing out in your stories as well, actually. The grace of God. He's favorable towards us, not disfavorable. So when it comes to the priestly prohibitions, I think what you got to remember is, this is given at a time when they've just come out of slavery, over 400 years of slavery, where the way in which you are measured is how well you can work, your agency. So if you can work hard, you are worth something. Yeah? And that's the mindset God was dealing with. And so this is what I find fascinating here. For me, God meets people where they are. They measure worth by agency, so he does that in the way he describes the priests. Yeah, because he's got to meet them there. He can't be meeting them as if they're mature. He's got to meet them where they're at. So he meets them there, and that's why you have that description. Remember where we are in the storyline. Just come out of slavery, not used to thinking for yourself, etc. And so he was willing to use their descriptions. But notice, later on in the Bible, God uses brokenness to describe what he's trying to do. Isaiah 53 is a perfect example, okay? And I think maybe for us, one big lesson is we should seek to imitate God's willingness to contextualize. Meet people where they are. This isn't so much about disability. This is about God reaching people where they are, speaking their language, which I think is absolutely fascinating. You've done this quite well already. It meant a lot of sin and disability is the way people were thinking. If you notice, Jesus' healing ministry, again, is to re-emphasize God is for you. All the miracles he did. Same thing there. The man born blind, I think, is fascinating because the work of God, remember he says, this has happened so that the work of God might be manifested in him. The work of God was not his healing. Jesus says in John 6, the work of God is this, to believe, to trust in God again. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to restore relationship. That's the work of God. So it wasn't so much about the healing, it's about revealing the man's faith, and he really did end up trusting God. So then, yes, I'll go past that. I'd like to say, for us as Adventists, we have a challenge, and this is stuff that I did in my dissertation. Our health message makes us look at people as healthy or unhealthy. When you see my son in a wheelchair, often people take for granted he's unhealthy because he's got a disability. We've got to rethink our health message so that we're not looking at people like that. Yeah? And our churches can be healing places. So let's redefine, this is my last slide. This, I believe, is true health. This theologian, Jürgen Moltmann, says, true health is the strength to live, the strength to suffer, the strength to die. Health is not a condition of my body, it is the power of my soul to cope with the varying conditions of that body. My son doesn't know what it's like to be pain-free. He has pain constantly. He lives with that. I'd say he's much healthier than I am because he has a strength of soul to cope with that every single day of his life. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Patrick. That was amazing. I had the pleasure having you as my pastor for 7 years in England, and I was blessed back then, and I hope everybody was blessed today as well by this presentation. Thank you so much again. And to our online viewers, first I want to apologize that we had some technical difficulties at the beginning, but we are working on those, and hopefully for the next session it will be better. So stay tuned, stay on our channel. You will see there is constant content. We try to provide as much as possible for you so that you at home can also be part of this amazing Youth Congress here. Thank you very much, and see you at the next stream.
Okay, enjoy your lunch, everyone.
Thank you so much. Did you do the filler?